He was just supposed to mop the stage, not make an entire room of soldiers cry. No one expected a forgotten piano. No one expected a single dad with calloused hands to finish a song that had waited years in silence. But when he played, even those who had stopped believing listened.
Now let's begin. The Baldwin Grand sat like a forgotten relic at center stage, its mahogany curves dulled by time, its lid half lifted like a mouth afraid to speak. Dust clung to the edges, light from the rafters, catching on the keys that hadn't been touched in years. And Jack Monroe stood over it, not as a performer, not even as a man who remembered how to play, but as a janitor with calloused hands and a quiet ache in his chest that had gone unnamed for far too long. He wiped the worn cloth gently across the piano's lid, slow and circular, like buffing a headstone. The hall was empty, save for the sound of distant clinks from silverware in the catering wing and the occasional echo of a staff member's heels across the marble. Outside, the early evening sky bruised into shades of lavender. Inside, Jack moved with reverence, pausing every so often to rest his hand on the Baldwin's wood, like one might rest a palm on a shoulder. "She hasn't spoken in a while," he muttered. "Who are you talking to?" A voice called behind him. Jack turned, startled but not surprised. Riley James stood just off stage, her uniform crisp, but her posture slightly wilted. 23, but her eyes looked older, like they had seen too many things she couldn't forget. "The piano," Jack said. "She used to talk." Riley didn't laugh. She stepped closer, instead curious. "I didn't know pianos could have personalities." Jack offered a faint smile. "Only the ones that have seen war." Her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer. Instead, he lifted the corner of the cloth, revealing the Baldwin's small brass plaque near the hinge. The inscription was barely visible, but Riley stepped closer and read aloud. "Property of U.S. Army, issued 1942. World War II issue," Jack explained. "They sent these out to bases, hospitals, field stations, wherever there was a soldier who needed a reminder that music still existed." She exhaled. "You know that. My forward operating base in Syria had a keyboard with 2 broken keys. We'd take turns trying to make music between drone strikes, the only thing that ever felt human." Jack nodded. "That's the thing. Music doesn't win wars, but it keeps people from losing themselves in them." Silence fell between them like a pause in a forgotten melody. Just then the doors swung open at the back of the auditorium. Derek Voss, in full-dress uniform flanked by 2 coordinators, strode in like he owned the room, and maybe he did. His medals caught the overhead lights flashing silver and gold as he descended the aisle, his voice cutting through the air like an unearned award. Well, he drawled, stopping at the edge of the stage. "Looks like we've got Beethoven on the payroll." Jack straightened cloth still in hand. "You know," Voss continued, voice booming now, drawing attention from the few others in the wings, "I thought I saw you fondling that thing earlier. What's the matter?" "Jack, thinking of auditioning for tomorrow night's gala." "Maybe open with a little chopsticks." Chuckles echoed light ones, uncertain, but they landed like punches. Jack didn't flinch. He lowered his gaze and resumed polishing. Riley stepped forward. "Sir, I don't think that's necessary." But Voss cut her off. "At ease. Private. I'm sure our maintenance man here appreciates a little humor." "Right, Jack." Still Jack said nothing, just folded the cloth neatly and laid it across the bench like a folded flag. Voss smirked. "See no harm done. It's good to see you taking such pride in your work." He looked around theatrically. After all, someone has to make sure the furniture's emotionally supported. Riley's jaw tightened. "But Jack..." He just reached down and picked up his toolbox. "You don't remember, do you?" he said quietly, eyes still down. Voss arched a brow. Remember what Jack finally looked up. Not angry. Not bitter. Just steady. You were a captain at the 56th VA in North Carolina. You walked right past me every day for 6 months. I was fixing radiators, mopping floors. My wife had just died in a blast while serving medical detail overseas. I asked for a music request form to play a small memorial piece for the recovery wing. You said it wasn't a good use of bandwidth. Voss blinked. The room froze. You remember now, Jack said. And with that, he stepped off stage, toolbox in one hand, dignity in the other. Riley stood motionless. The Baldwin sat gleaming in the spotlight, untouched, but somehow more alive than it had been in years. Voss shifted on his heels, scoffing, trying to recover. Well, we can't all be composers, can we? But no one laughed. Backstage, Jack leaned against the corridor wall, breathing slow, as if bracing for a storm that had already passed. He pulled a folded piece of sheet music from his vest pocket, a tattered page titled Lena's Lullaby. Half notes danced with hesitation across its creased surface. He'd never played it in public. Never finished it, really. It had belonged to someone else once. Hey, a soft voice said beside him. Riley had followed. You should have said something sooner, she murmured. Jack shook his head. People don't listen when it's not part of the program. She hesitated, then reached into her pocket and held out a small military dog tag. It was worn, dulled at the edges. Your wife saved my life, she said. Voice catching. She was the medic on my convoy. She held my hand when I thought I was bleeding out. She hummed something. I don't know the tune, but I've never forgotten it. It kept me awake. Alive. Jack stared at the tag. He hadn't known the name of the soldier his wife had saved. He hadn't known there was anyone left to remember her voice. She hummed a lullaby, Riley added. Is that the one? He nodded slowly, holding up the faded music sheet. She exhaled deeply. Then maybe it's time you finish it. The clock in the hallway ticked louder than usual, or maybe it only seemed that way to Jack as he stared at the crumpled sheet music in his hand. Lena's Lullaby, half written, half remembered, half his. He hadn't let anyone see it since the funeral. Not Emily. Not even himself, not really. Just a few lines scratched on a page, trembling notes that used to be hers until she was gone, and they belonged to no one. Jack turned the page over, stared at the blank back. His breath was shallow. Across from him in the break-room-turned storage closet, Riley sat on a folding chair, hands clasped, dog tag, resting in her palm like a stone she couldn't let go of. Her eyes were dry now, but her posture betrayed the weight she carried.
She hummed while I was going in and out, Riley said quietly. It was like... not music exactly. More like remembering something warm during something cold. Jack nodded, but said nothing. It didn't make sense at the time she went on. I was bleeding through my uniform. There was sand in my teeth. I didn't even know if I was still whole. He swallowed hard. You weren't supposed to remember her voice. I didn't, Riley said. Not clearly, just enough. She paused, eyes locked on the tag in her hand. But I remember how it made me feel. Safe, for just a second. Like maybe I wasn't dying. Jack leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. She used to say lullabies were like promises. They don't stop the dark. They just say, I'll stay until it passes. Riley's jaw trembled. She kept that promise. They sat in silence, two survivors of the same woman, one who carried her blood, the other who carried her last breath. Jack looked at her, really looked at her now, not just as the soldier who had asked him to play, but as someone marked by the same kind of silence he lived in, the kind that didn't scream, the kind that haunted from underneath. What happened to you after that? He asked gently. She shrugged slow. They medevaced me out. Spent 2 months in recovery. Told me I was lucky. Were you? She smiled sadly. That depends what you call luck. I got back. But I couldn't sleep. couldn't hear thunder without shaking, couldn't look at my uniform without remembering that someone else died wearing one. Jack's fingers curled slowly around the edges of the music sheet. You know what's worse than guilt? Riley looked up, thinking it was all for nothing. Their eyes met the air between them, thick and still. I tried to play once, Jack said, just a few weeks after the funeral. I sat at the piano in our apartment, same one Lena used to sit beside, and I lifted the lid. I stared at the keys for 15 minutes. Didn't touch a single one. What stopped you? He looked away. Everything. The smell of her perfume on the cushion, the silence in the room, the feeling that if I played, I'd somehow betray her memory by making noise in her absence. Riley inhaled long and steady. I think she'd call that grief. I call it cowardice. She shook her head firmly. It's not cowardice to be broken. It's only cowardice to pretend you're not. Jack blinked at that. Riley stood. You have no idea how many soldiers I've met who walk around in full armor smiling like hell while bleeding inside. He looked down at the music again. And you? You don't smile much. She gave a half smile just then. Sharp ironic. That's because I stopped pretending. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Then she walked to the corner, lifted an old dusty metronome off the shelf. It ticked once, when she adjusted it like a breath waking up after years asleep. You know, she said, setting it on the table, my mom used to say, if you want to hear someone's truth, ask them to play you something they didn't rehearse. Jack chuckled low and bitter. All I've got are things I never finished. Then maybe you're the most honest person in this building. Outside the break room, the hall buzzed with pre-gala chaos, lights being tested, instruments tuned, someone barking orders over a headset. It was a world moving fast, while inside time stood still between two people held together by a song neither had ever heard fully. Riley reached the door, but paused before stepping out. I think she said slowly, you should finish the lullaby. Jack looked up. For her, Riley added, and for me, because if someone doesn't play it, it's like she never sang it at all. He didn't answer, not with words. Instead, he reached for the metronome, let it tick once, then twice, then again. A heartbeat. And just like that, something in the silence began to shift. The morning of the gala arrived with the kind of manufactured excitement that clung to every surface like expensive cologne. White-gloved servers hustled through the backstage corridor. Spotlights warmed up overhead with slow, deliberate sweeps. Staffers adjusted chair placements with a precision better suited for military formations than music. Jack Monroe had been there since 6:30 a.m., adjusting wiring under the stage risers, reinforcing the Baldwin's piano bench, and making sure no cables would trip a senator's wife or a retired general. He moved like a shadow, calm, methodical, careful, never to make eye contact too long or draw attention. Janitors weren't meant to linger in the light. He wore the same faded denim shirt, sleeves rolled just below the elbows, a black vest with his name embroidered in soft thread, and a pair of well-worn boots scuffed by decades of labor. There was nothing remarkable about him. That's how he preferred it. But not everyone agreed. Mr. Monroe came a voice as slick as engine grease. Jack straightened beneath the stage, bumping his head on a lighting bracket before backing out. He rose to face a wall of brass and smugness. Lieutenant Colonel Derek Voss, freshly pressed and perfectly groomed. His nameplate gleamed. So did the row of ribbons on his chest, each one polished to reflect more glory than memory. Colonel Jack said measured. Voss didn't acknowledge the title. He tilted his head toward the piano like he was inspecting livestock. Tell me, he said. With a smile stretched thin, do you normally get so intimate with the instruments, or is this part of your maintenance foreplay? A few nearby assistants laughed too quickly, too loud. Jack heard Riley's footsteps before he saw her. She was moving fast, crossing the stage from the left wing, expression unreadable. Voss stepped onto the hardwood floor of the stage, clapping once to gather the attention of those nearby. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said grandly, "before we begin the sound check, I'd like to introduce you to one of our unsung heroes." Jack froze. This fine gentleman has single-handedly ensured every light, chair, outlet and tile in this building is polished to the military standard of excellence. Voss gestured toward Jack. Jack Monroe, janitor, floor technician, and apparently aspiring artist. Riley stopped, short eyes narrowing. "See, Voss continued yesterday. I caught him whispering sweet nothings to the Baldwin Grand over there. Gave her a rub down like she was a prom queen. Laughter again. Fuller this time. The kind that stings." Jack said nothing. He bent down, collected the leftover tape and tools from the floor, and folded his cloth with quiet precision. But Voss wasn't done. "Now, Jack," he said, stepping closer, lowering his voice just enough to twist the knife. "I hear you've got a real history with music. Taught at Juilliard, right?" "That true?" Jack looked up. Voss smiled. "I did my homework. Wife was military. Died overseas. You quit. Took a mop instead of a mic. A different kind of heroism, I suppose." The silence that followed wasn't respectful. It was suffocating. Riley moved forward now, voice low and direct. "Colonel, with respect." "Not now," Private Voss snapped, then turned to the gathering audience of staff, vendors and performers. "I say we let him play something tonight. What do you all think? A little pre-show surprise from our maintenance." Mozart Jack's jaw tightened just slightly. A twitch, nothing more. But Riley saw it. Someone in the corner muttered, "Let him. It'll be good for a laugh." Another voice added, "He knows his way around the piano. Could be entertaining." It wasn't encouragement. It was bait. Voss clapped again. "We'll pencil you in, Jack. One song. Just don't slip on the floor you waxed." Jack exhaled slowly. Not anger. Something else. A depth Riley couldn't read, like the weight of remembering too much in a single breath. "I didn't come here to play," Jack said softly. "No," Voss replied, mock sympathy dripping from every syllable. "You came to clean." He turned and walked away, the echo of his footsteps louder than any applause that might have followed. Riley waited until the hallway was clear, then stepped beside Jack. "You okay?" He didn't answer right away. Just looked at the piano from across the stage. "I should be used to it by now," he said. "But you're not." He shook his head. "No one ever gets used to being invisible." "Not really. You just learn to walk around the spotlight." Riley touched his arm, firm and grounding. "You don't have to play. Not for him. Not for anyone." Jack's voice was low but heavy with something old and aching. "Then who's going to play for her?" Riley blinked. "You mean your wife?" He nodded once. "Then do it," she said. "Not on his schedule. On yours." Jack looked at her, and for the first time there was a flicker of something alive behind his eyes. Not rage, not pride, just the quiet question of what might still be left unplayed. The auditorium was empty again. Quiet in the way cathedrals are before sunrise, still and sacred. Dust motes hung suspended in the late afternoon light, like tiny prayers left unsaid. The Baldwin Grand stood alone beneath the single beam of a stage light, its polished wood now gleaming from Jack's earlier cleaning. But Jack wasn't here to clean anymore. He stood off stage, hands shoved into his jacket pockets, staring at the piano like it was a ghost he wasn't ready to face. No one else was around. No Voss. No Riley. Just the faint hum of an HVAC system and the echo of his own heartbeat. Jack stepped forward slowly, boots whispering across the wooden floor. Each step felt like trespassing on something holy. He paused at the bench. It looked smaller than he remembered, though perhaps it was he who had grown heavier, not with size, but with the weight of time. He sat down, exhaling long and quiet. The lid was already lifted. He reached out, hesitated, then let his fingers hover just above the keys. His hands were not the same hands that had once played Carnegie Hall. They were older now, the knuckles-worn fingertips calloused from years of labor. But beneath all that, somewhere deep in the bone, the memory of music still lived. He pressed a single key. C. It rang out soft, mellow, like a voice that hadn't spoken in years, but still knew its own name. He pressed another. Then another. Not a melody, just isolated notes like testing the pulse of a sleeping friend. Jack closed his eyes, and suddenly he was back. Not here, not in the military theater, but in a small apartment above a bakery in Queens. The air smelled of cinnamon and window cleaner. Lena was sitting cross-legged on the floor, hair pinned up messily, a legal pad in her lap. She was humming, always humming. And the old Baldwin upright they'd rescued from a junk shop leaned against the far wall, half-tuned, but wholly loved. She'd laugh every time he had a sour note and shout, "Play it again, Professor." But this time with feeling. Jack's fingers moved again. G, E, D. Pause. Then F sharp. He didn't remember the whole lullaby, but his muscles remembered pieces, like the way grief remembers anniversaries your mind tries to forget. The melody came in fragments, like ash in the wind, like catching your wife's perfume in the scarf you haven't washed in years. He played what he knew. Then he added what he didn't. Not from memory, but from feeling. The notes were uneven, a bit raw, but sincere, like truth whispered in the dark. He played until the silence wasn't silence anymore, and he didn't notice Riley had entered the auditorium until the last chord rang out and didn't echo back. She stood at the aisle's edge, arms crossed, not saying a word. Jack sat motionless. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to." "Don't apologize," she said. Jack turned to her. Riley's face wasn't soft. It wasn't even kind. It was reverent. "I didn't want to intrude," she said, walking slowly toward the stage. "But I heard it. From the hall. I didn't know music could sound like that." "Like what?" She stopped beside the piano. "Like grief, but gentle." Jack nodded once, then looked down. "I used to think music was about precision, hitting the right notes, perfect dynamics, tempo." Lena didn't believe that. What did she believe? That music should mean something, even if it wasn't perfect, especially if it wasn't perfect. Riley sat on the edge of the stage, close, but not too close. She must have been extraordinary. She was, Jack whispered. "Then don't let Voss be the reason her song stays unfinished." Jack shook his head. "It's not just Voss." "Then what is it?" Jack exhaled long and hollow. "It's the fear that if I finish this song, if I finally let it into the world, then it's no longer hers. It becomes something others can misunderstand, mock, reduce." Riley nodded slowly. "But if you don't share it, it dies with her." Silence. This time a different kind. Jack looked down at the keys again. His thumb brushed gently over middle C, almost like he was soothing the instrument itself. "I used to think playing for people was about proving something," he said. "Now I think it's about giving something." Riley smiled, soft and sure. "Then maybe it's time you give." He looked up at her. "And if no one listens, I will." Jack stared at her for a moment, and something old in him, something buried beneath the dust of loss, leaned forward. He stood up, gently closed the lid of the Baldwin, and placed both palms flat on the polished wood. A quiet moment of thanks. Then he turned to Riley. "Help me rewrite it." She blinked. "Me?" "You heard her hum it. You remember how it made you feel. That matters more than theory." Riley looked at the piano, then back at Jack. "You sure?" He nodded. Lena saved you once. Now maybe you can help finish what she started." And in that small auditorium filled only with ghosts, Jack and Riley sat down side by side on the bench. Two soldiers of different wars. Two hearts still learning how to play. Riley didn't knock when she entered the operations wing. She didn't have to, not when she was already vibrating with the kind of anger that made decorum irrelevant. Lieutenant Colonel Derek Voss sat behind his desk in a spotless office lined with military plaques and photographs of him shaking hands with people more powerful than he'd ever be. He didn't look up immediately, just gestured with two fingers to the chair across from him. "Private Wynne," he said flatly, eyes still on a file. "If this is about the mess in the auditorium again, I want Jack Monroe on the gala program." That made him look up. For a moment, Voss simply stared, his expression a mixture of amusement and annoyance. "You're serious?" "I'm dead serious." He leaned back, lacing his fingers behind his head. "You do realize this is a formal event. Dignitaries, veterans, medal recipients. Not some charity open mic night for janitors with midlife delusions." "He's not just a janitor," Riley snapped. "He's a gifted musician. A combat survivor's husband. A man who's been through hell and still shows up every day to serve this base." Voss stood the shift in posture, deliberate, dominant. "You've been spending too much time in mop closets with ghosts." She didn't flinch. "That ghost saved my life." Voss chuckled low and condescending. "And now you think he's going to save the morale of an entire theater with a lullaby." She stepped forward. "It's not just a lullaby. It's the last thing his wife ever gave this world." The colonel's eyes darkened. "Let me make myself very clear, Private. You bring his name up again. You so much as suggest putting him on stage one more time, and I'll have you reassigned out of the medical corps and onto kitchen duty so fast your boots won't catch up." Riley stared at him, her jaw clenched, her fists trembling, but not from fear. "From restraint. Dismissed," Voss said. But she didn't move. She just looked at him like someone silently measuring whether a person was still worth arguing with. Then she turned without a word and left the door clicking shut behind her with all the weight of a slammed piano lid. Jack was tightening a bolt on the lighting rig when she found him. He was back in work mode. Vast zipped-up toolbox open, his expression unreadable. He didn't notice her approach until she spoke. He said no. Jack didn't look up. Didn't expect otherwise. "He threatened me." That made him pause, wrench in mid-turn. Would have told me he'd reassign me if I brought it up again. Jack stood slowly wiping his hands on a towel, his eyes still avoiding hers. "Then don't bring it up again." "Jack." "Let it go, Riley." "No." His eyes finally met hers, and in them she didn't see anger. She saw something worse. Defeat. The quiet kind. The kind you carry so long it becomes invisible. "I need to tell you something," she said softly. Jack blinked, surprised by the shift in her tone. She took a breath. "I never told you what happened that day. In the field." He didn't interrupt. "I was leading a civilian extraction unit. Just 2 trucks. We were ambushed near Kandahar. I got separated from the others. I took cover behind a burned-out vehicle and then I heard footsteps. I turned. And I saw her." Jack's breath caught. She was wearing medic red. "Your wife." "Lena." He said nothing. She shouldn't have been there. She wasn't assigned to our unit. But she ran toward me like she'd known me her whole life. No hesitation. Riley's voice cracked. She threw herself between me and the shooter, took the round in her chest, dropped instantly. Jack closed his eyes. "I held her," Riley whispered. "My hands couldn't stop the bleeding. I told her I was sorry. Over and over." Her lip trembled. And then in the last few seconds she started humming. Jack opened his eyes. "I don't know what it was," Riley said. "Just this haunting, beautiful melody. I don't even think she knew I could hear her. But I did." Jack's voice, when it came, was barely a breath. Can you hum it?" Riley nodded and took a shaky breath. Then she hummed. Soft. Uneven. Wounded. But unmistakable. Jack's knees nearly buckled. He gripped the edge of the lighting frame like a drowning man grabs driftwood. "That's—" He choked Lena's lullaby. Riley's eyes widened. "That's the name. It's the piece she started when she was pregnant," he whispered. "Said she wanted to finish it after the baby was born. She never got the chance." Riley stepped closer. "Jack, she gave it to me. Not as a song, as a memory. You're the only one who can give it to the world." He looked at her, 1,000 emotions warring in his expression: grief, disbelief, awe. "I thought it died with her," he said. "It didn't," Riley said, her voice steady now. "It lived in me. And now, it's back in you." They stood in silence, the hum of distant rehearsal notes echoing faintly through the air, Vent's horns tuning percussion, tapping strings, warming up for a night neither of them would forget. For the first time, Jack didn't feel like a ghost. He felt like a bridge, and suddenly the decision wasn't about Voss or humiliation or revenge. It was about Lena. It was about finishing the lullaby. The ballroom was dressed in gold. Warm chandeliers spilled light across polished wood floors, and walls adorned with military insignias, framed photographs, and flags so carefully draped they looked frozen in salute. Rows of honored guests sat in precise formation uniforms, pressed medals gleaming their expressions, varying between polite interest and mild boredom as the MC listed off VIP names with mechanical cheer. A brass quintet had just finished a service medley, and the audience was ready, waiting for the main act, a celebrated pianist flown in from New York. Instead, the microphone screeched gently as Colonel Derek Voss took the stage. He adjusted his lapel, flashed a thin smile, and leaned toward the mic with theatrical smoothness. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice laced with a smug charm, "before we bring out tonight's headliner, we have a very special opening act." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Voss continued louder now. "You've seen him mopping your hallways, fixing your sinks, clearing your lunch trays. But what you may not know is our very own Jack Monroe once graced stages that weren't covered in floor wax." Nervous laughter from a few corners. Most remained silent. Voss gestured toward the wings. "So in the spirit of community, and let's say bold experimentation, please welcome the genius of sanitation himself, Mr. Jack Monroe." Scattered applause, a few chuckles, a whistle from the back that felt crueler than enthusiastic. From the side curtain, Jack stepped out. Every inch of his body resisted, not because he was afraid of the crowd, but because he had not been invited. He had been offered up. The stage lights hit him like a sudden storm. Hot. Blinding. He moved slowly across the stage, past the polished Baldwin Grand that stood waiting like an old friend, too long ignored. He heard someone whisper, "This is a joke, right?" He caught a woman near the front lean toward her husband and mutter, "Isn't that the janitor from the West Wing?" He stopped in front of the piano and looked down at the keys, but he didn't sit. Not yet. Not until his eyes found Riley. She stood alone in the aisle just off the center row. No dress uniform tonight, just a modest black blouse, and slacks her hair down for once a single silver chain around her neck. She wasn't clapping, she wasn't moving. But tears traced slow, silent lines down her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from knowing, from remembering. Jack inhaled. The lights were too bright to see the whole crowd clearly, but he didn't need to. He had been here before. Not this exact stage, but this exact moment. The one where every eye waits for you to fail. Where every smile masks a question, "Who do you think you are?" He sat, placed both hands on the Baldwin's keys, and let his fingers rest there, motionless, just long enough for the entire room to grow painfully still. There was no laughter now, only the uncomfortable quiet of people unsure whether they were about to witness brilliance or disaster. Jack closed his eyes. He thought of the night Lena first hummed the lullaby, just a few fragile notes, over a sink full of baby bottles. The tune had no name then, just love. He thought of Riley soaked in blood and sand, hearing the same melody as his wife bled out in her arms. He thought of all the years he'd locked this song away like a secret, too sacred to survive judgment. And then he began to play. At first the sound was timid, the kind of sound that doesn't yet believe it has the right to exist. Jack's fingers trembled on the Baldwin's ivory keys, brushing the opening notes, like a man waking an old friend from slumber. Each press was gentle, unsure, not because he'd forgotten the music, but because the music remembered too much. The first measures were broken, halting breaths between sobs. But slowly the notes began to settle. They thickened, widened, grew bold. Like Lena's voice returning through him piece by piece. There were no color spotlights, no fog machines, no showmanship, just one man, one instrument. And the Baldwin Grand, 1942, a relic that had traveled through 2 wars stationed in army bases, leaned on by broken men in hospital gowns who had nowhere to go but back into memory. Tonight that same piano carried the weight of something more ancient than applause. The lullaby unfolded, not as a composition, but as a confession. The middle section lingered in an unfamiliar minor key, raw and unstable, like a grief that hadn't found its words yet. The high notes rang brittle, 1 or 2 cracked slightly under Jack's hands, but he didn't flinch. He played through them. Because truth isn't always in tune. He leaned into the keys harder now, as though trying to force his own pulse into the wood. The Baldwin responded, not with brilliance, but with memory. It groaned and wept, and lifted him like it remembered Lena too. In the third row, a Silver Star recipient, the one with the oxygen tank, and the tremor in his jaw, lowered his head, and wept openly. Near the side wall, a man with one arm wrapped around his wife clutched her tighter, as if the notes had exposed a wound neither of them had ever put into words. And behind the velvet curtain, Riley dropped to her knees. She hadn't meant to cry, had promised herself she wouldn't, but the moment Jack reached the bridge, the part Lena had whispered with her dying breath, her body gave out. Her shoulders shook, and she covered her mouth to stifle the sob. It was her melody, and it was Lena's. But now it was also Jack's, finally whole. On stage, Jack's foot pressed the soft pedal, the notes now floating upward, like ashes from a letter you couldn't bring yourself to keep. Voss, seated stiffly at a VIP table near the front, didn't move. His arms were still crossed, but his face wasn't smirking anymore. In fact, he wasn't even breathing through his nose. His jaw was tight, and his eyes were pinned to the keyboard, not in judgment, but in a kind of reluctant awe. He had planned a mockery. What he received was reverence. The melody-crested rose into its final refrain, not triumphant, but redemptive. There was no bravado in this performance, no attempt to dazzle or entertain. Only a man giving away the last piece of his heart to a room full of strangers. The final notes slowed like breath at bedtime, soft, steady. The kind of ending that doesn't demand applause but deserves silence. Jack held the final chord, letting it ring in the air long after his fingers had lifted. And no one moved. No one clapped. No one whispered. It was as though the room itself had been disarmed. Somewhere in the back, a woman exhaled sharply just enough to break the spell. Then the entire audience rose, not in excitement, but in solemn unity.
Every seat empty, every heart full. There was no ovation. Only the rustling of jackets, the quiet slide of boots on the ballroom floor. Voss stood too slowly, like he wasn't sure how to not stand in the presence of something that honest. Jack bowed his head, not in humility, but in farewell. This wasn't a debut. It was a benediction. He stood up from the bench. His hands, still trembling, fell to his sides. And for the first time since Lena died, Jack Monroe felt empty in the right way. Not hollow, not erased, but poured out. Given. He turned and exited the stage without a word. And the Baldwin Grand 1942, its finish worn, its strings imperfect, its keys weathered by history, stood alone under the spotlight. Still, holy, remembering. Jack stood alone beside the Baldwin, still lit by a single spotlight, though the music had long since faded. He hadn't bowed, hadn't waited for applause, hadn't needed it. The notes still echoed in the hearts of everyone in the room, like the distant toll of church bells at dusk, too sacred to follow with noise. Then slowly, movement returned. Chairs creaked. Metals clinked gently as guests adjusted their postures, some dabbing their eyes, others clearing their throats, like they'd just been released from a spell. But before anyone could step forward or reset the evening's scheduled order, Riley appeared, walking with quiet resolve toward the piano. There was no music cued, no cue in the program, no authorization from Voss, only the hush of a room leaning forward in unison. She wore no uniform, no rank, just a black blouse with sleeves rolled up a single chain visible around her neck. Her face was pale from tears, but her spine straight. She stepped beside Jack, nodded once to him, then turned to face the crowd. Her voice didn't need a microphone, because silence, when earned, carries farther than sound. "I wasn't supposed to survive," she said. No one stirred. I was clinically dead for 90 seconds after the ambush in Kandahar. I remember flashes, chaos, heat pressure. And then I heard something. A pause. She looked down at the Baldwin. It wasn't a voice, not a command, not a scream, just music. A lullaby floating in the darkness, like someone was holding me when no one could. Her hands trembled slightly, but she didn't hide them. For the longest time, I thought it was a dream. A hallucination. I told the base chaplain it was probably some trick of my brain firing its last sparks before shutting down. She turned to Jack, eyes shining, but tonight I heard it again. Her voice cracked, not from weakness, but from weight. That lullaby. It wasn't in my imagination. It was real. It was Lena's. It was his. Jack swallowed, stunned into stillness. And now I know she said that I didn't survive by chance. I survived because someone gave their life for me, and because something deeper than orders, deeper than duty, carried me back. She turned back to the crowd, her voice firm. That song didn't just save me once. It saved me again tonight. It reminded me that I have no right to waste a second more of the life I was given. I need to live it fully, bravely, in a way that honors those who gave theirs. Gasps, a muffled sob. Then someone clapped. Then another. Then a wave. Not polite, not perfunctory. Eruption. A standing ovation this time, not for performance, but confession. For something so raw it transcended ceremony. Colonel Voss rose slowly, his jaw clenched, his eyes tight. But even he did not attempt to interrupt. He couldn't. The room no longer belonged to him. It belonged to the truth, and truth had just been spoken through music and memory, and one soldier's vow to live on purpose. Later that night, long after the final speeches were rushed through, and the official pianist played with technical brilliance, no one remembered. Riley found Jack leaning against a column near the back exit. He looked spent, the kind of tired that came not from effort, but from release. His tie was undone, and for the first time in years, his shoulders didn't slope downward. "You always knew?" she asked gently. He shook his head. I tried to forget. But you couldn't. No, Jack said. Because she wouldn't let me. They stood in silence together away from the stage, the lights, the crowd still buzzing about what they'd witnessed. You know what the scariest part was, Jack finally said. Riley tilted her head. That I might play it, and no one would feel what I felt. That maybe it only meant something to me. She stepped closer. It meant everything to us. He looked at her then, not as a janitor, not as a broken man, but as someone who had just handed a piece of his soul to the world and was astonished to find it held with care. You didn't just play a song, she said, her voice thick. You gave Lena back to the world. And to me. A tear slipped down his cheek. He didn't wipe it. For once, he let it fall. That night, the Baldwin Grand sat quietly beneath its velvet cover. But every technician who passed it swore they could still hear a single note lingering in the air, soft and unwavering, as if the old piano wasn't done speaking yet. Colonel Derek Voss stood beneath the grand military insignia at the ballroom's far wall, hands behind his back, lips drawn into a firm line. His polished boots clicked once against the marble floor as he shifted weight, his first sign of discomfort all evening. He'd hoped the audience would forget, that the ovation was a fluke, that the moment of silence following Jack's performance was a passing emotion easily drowned out by the clinking of glasses and patriotic speeches. But by morning, everything had changed. Someone, likely that wiry young corporal from public affairs, had live-streamed the entire sequence on his phone. A shaky feed captured Jack stepping onto stage, the awkward introduction, then silence, then music, and then Riley's speech. The video hit 4 million views by dawn. The janitor who made a ballroom cry, veterans saved by a lullaby, healing notes, a civilian's piano stun's military gala. Across the country, veterans shared the clip. Music therapists retweeted it with captions like, "This is why we fight for arts and healing." A retired Army nurse commented, "I haven't cried like this since my last deployment." But Voss didn't cry. He clenched. At 9:42 a.m.,
his inbox pinged with a flagged message marked, "Urgent Office of Inspector General. Command Conduct Review." He blinked twice at the subject line, read it again. Someone in Washington had watched the clip and asked a question no one in the ballroom dared speak aloud the night before. Why was this man publicly mocked before performing something that saved lives? By noon, 2 more sponsors had withdrawn their support from the gala series, citing deep concerns about tone-deaf leadership. Voss tried to spin it. In a press call that afternoon, he stood in front of the base's flag wall and declared, "We strive for community engagement. Our intention was never disrespect. Mr. Monroe's performance was a welcomed surprise." But no one was buying it, because intent no longer mattered. Impact had already made its rounds. Meanwhile, Jack was back at work the next morning early before the maintenance crew arrived, mop in hand, boots scuffed, shirt sleeves rolled up. He could feel the shift in the air. The same officers who used to walk past him without acknowledgement now nodded, even paused to say things like, "Beautiful music, sir. Didn't know you had that in you. Made me call my daughter last night." Jack responded the only way he knew how, quietly. A nod, a faint smile. Then he returned to the floor buffer. Because the stage had never been his destination. It was just a moment, and he had already given it away. Riley found him in the auditorium lobby 2 days later. She stood at the base of the stairwell in civilian clothes, holding a clipboard and a manila envelope under one arm. "You're avoiding your email," she said without preamble. Jack leaned on the mop handle. "It avoids me too. We've come to a silent agreement." She rolled her eyes. "You've been asked to play at the Healing Warriors benefit next month. Denver VA Hospital. They'll fly you, pay you, Put you up with the rest of the performers?" Jack shook his head before she even finished. "No. Jack, I played the song once, for the person it belonged to. I'm not a performer, I'm a janitor." "No, you're not," Riley said. "You're a healer. You just don't use scalpels or prescriptions." He was quiet a long time before replying. "That piano. That night. It wasn't about music. It was Lena. It was closure." "Then maybe," Riley said, stepping closer, "it can be that for someone else too." He looked at her, really looked, and saw in her eyes the same pain he carried, and the same need to do something with it. "What about you?" he asked. She held up the envelope. "Paperwork's in. I've requested transfer, not out of the army, just sideways. I'll be overseeing the new music and memory integration program." "That a real department?" He smirked. "It is now," she said, grinning. "Command's embarrassed. They're letting me run with it. Turns out you lit a fire under more than one colonel's chair." He let out a soft laugh, surprised at how easy it felt. "You're changing course," he said, nodding toward her form. "And so are you," she countered. "I'm not going on tour," he warned. "You don't have to," she replied. "Just don't disappear again." He nodded. The kind of nod that meant maybe. The kind that meant we'll see. The kind that left the door open. Outside the auditorium, the winter wind whistled softly through the base's flagpoles. In one corner of the compound, someone played an old recording of Lena's lullaby on their phone. A nurse paused, hand on a soldier's shoulder, letting the melody soak into the sterile hallway. The sound wasn't perfect, but like Jack's performance, like Lena's whisper, it was enough. Enough to remind them all that what uniforms forget, music remembers. There was no sign on the door, just a weathered brass knob and a small plaque from decades ago that read, "Storage, G3 Communications." It had once been filled with cables, dusty fold-out chairs, forgotten banners from past promotions. No one missed it when it disappeared from inventory. No one filed a request when Riley pulled the keys from an old drawer and unlocked it for the first time in years. The walls were beige institutional, the windows small and smeared with dust. But the acoustics, Jack noted the first time he stepped inside, were perfect. Every sound was crisp, rounded, honest. No reverb, no echo. Just truth. Riley swept the floor. Jack rewired the old outlet strips. Emily, the little girl from base housing who'd begun following Riley around like a shadow, helped string up battery-powered lanterns with handmade tissue paper shades. No stage, no spotlight, just a single upright Baldwin Grand, 1942, placed in the center, its paint-retouched strings, cleaned, and a new felt cover sewn by the military spouse sewing circle who heard about the project and insisted on helping. They named it the listening room. Not a theater, not a recovery center, just a space where people could let music say what words never had. No seating plan, no hierarchy. Soldiers sat cross-legged next to toddlers. Spouses leaned against support beams. A general once sat in the corner in sweatpants and nodded in rhythm with a Marine Corps harmonica player. Riley opened the first night with no speech, just a soft invitation. "Play what you need to say," she said, "or just listen." A veteran with Parkinson's played a slowed-down version of "Take Me Home, Country Roads." His fingers missed 3 chords, but no one noticed. His wife cried halfway through. A teenager sang a cover of her mother's favorite Elvis tune, her voice cracking but proud. Then Jack sat down. He hadn't planned to play. But the room asked gently without words. He touched the keys and began something new. Not Lena's lullaby. Not a song he knew. Just sound. Gentle. Circular. Almost like a rocking chair. Emily, seated in the back with her sketch pad balanced on her knees, began to draw while he played. She didn't look up. Didn't hesitate. Crayons moved quickly in her small hands, charcoal brown like blue. By the time Jack lifted his hands from the piano, the room was silent again. Not heavy, not stunned, but held. As if everyone had been reminded, you're not alone here. You were never alone. Riley sat beside Emily and asked, "Can I see?" The little girl turned the sketchbook. It was a simple drawing. 3 figures, 1 tall man with long blonde hair, 1 woman with her hair in a bun, and a child holding a crayon. Behind them, the Baldwin. Around them, music lines like vines. Notes that floated not into ears, but into hearts. At the bottom, in shaky crayon lettering, it read, "Some sounds aren't heard with ears, but with the heart." Riley didn't say anything for a moment. Then she reached for Jack's hand, and this time he didn't pull away. They began opening the listening room every Thursday and Saturday. People signed up without pressure. Some came to play. Others just came to be. A combat medic played taps one night and collapsed in tears halfway through. A Gold Star mother brought her son's playlist and let it shuffle through the night, just sat quietly with her memories while the music filled the room. Riley taught Emily how to harmonize on Let It Be. Jack played background to nearly every session, always humble, always steady. But the most beautiful sounds weren't the ones from the Baldwin. They were the sounds that rose when the music stopped. Laughter, deep breaths, words like, "I didn't know I needed that," and silence. Not awkward silence, but sacred. One evening Riley leaned against the piano while Jack adjusted the tuning of a sticky E-flat. "You know," she said, "we may not be saving the world." He looked up and smiled. "No," she shook her head. "But we're giving it a quieter place to breathe." Jack pressed a key. The pitch rang true. "Turns out," he said, "sometimes that's all someone needs." At the next session they installed a small frame above the Baldwin, a gift from Emily. Inside was her original drawing. The caption remained, "Some sounds aren't heard with ears, but with the heart." No one questioned it, because everyone in that room had felt it. The first snow of the season drifted across the parking lot of Fort Wallace, like slow-falling memories, soft, deliberate white. Inside the old storage room, now warm with golden lamplight, and voices, hushed in reverence, people gathered. Not in uniforms, not in ranks, just as themselves. Some wore jeans. Others wore old service jackets that didn't quite fit anymore. A child in the front row clutched a plush rabbit with a ribbon tied around its ear. A woman in the back brought a photo of her husband. She didn't cry. She just kept her fingers pressed gently to the glass. Riley stood by the door, greeting each person by name. Jack sat at the Baldwin. 1 year. It had been 1 year since that night. 1 year since the ballroom, since Voss's fall. Since Riley stepped forward and said the thing no one dared say aloud. "Music saved me. Tonight was the anniversary, not of Lena's death, not of any battle, but of the day the lullaby became whole again." Jack ran his fingers across the keys, not playing yet, just letting them rest, feel, remember. He glanced at Riley, now sitting beside him on the piano bench, her hand already in his. She didn't need to speak. She was the answer he'd been searching for all along. A seat creaked. Someone coughed. Then silence. Not the awkward kind. The sacred kind. And Jack began to play. Lena's lullaby. But this time, all of it. Not the half-forgotten version whispered through tears on a battlefield. Not the trembling draft played in a military gall out of guilt or grief. This was the finished piece. It started the same simple chords, a melody shaped like the curve of a rocking chair. But where it once ended prematurely, it now swelled, grew, unfolded. Jack had written the final bars himself, not to replace Lena's voice, but to carry it farther. The middle passage echoed like memory, but the ending felt like tomorrow. Riley squeezed his hand. At that last rise in tempo, he didn't look at her. He didn't need to. The room held its breath through the final chord. And then stillness. Not applause, not cheers, just the soft sound of healing. A child's quiet hum, an old man wiping his eyes, two teenage boys leaning into each other, nodding, not speaking. The kind of moment where no one wanted to be the first to move, because they weren't just listening to music. They were listening to hope, later that night after chairs were stacked and cocoa cups rinsed, and Emily's newest drawing was pinned to the wall. Riley and Jack walked the long hallway back toward the parking lot. Outside, the snow had stopped. "You knew how it would end," Riley said softly. "No," Jack said. "But I knew it was time to stop carrying it in silence." She slipped her arm into his. "So what now?" He smiled. "We keep playing. Even if they stop listening." He stopped walking, turned to her. "They won't," he said, "because they never really stopped. They were just waiting for someone to remind them what music could do." Riley rested her head on his shoulder. "You're not playing for Lena anymore." "No," he said. "I'm playing for us, for everyone still here, still hurting, still healing." A gust of wind carried a loose leaf across the pavement. Behind them, from inside the listening room, someone had sat down at the Baldwin. A new melody. Soft, unfamiliar, but earnest. Jack smiled. "Looks like it's not just my song anymore." In the months that followed, the listening room expanded. A second was opened at a naval base in California, then a third in a rural Midwest clinic. Riley helped train coordinators, while Jack quietly mentored new players, not in technique, but in purpose. A motto was printed on every wall, translated from a child's crayon drawing. "Some sounds aren't heard with ears, but with the heart." Veterans began bringing old instruments from closets and attics, trumpets, guitars, a clarinet missing its reed. Children wrote songs for lost grandparents. Widows hummed lullabies into microphones. And always in the background, the Baldwin Grand, 1942, its hammers worn, its keys yellowed at the edges, still spoke. Because music like that doesn't age. It becomes memory, becomes medicine, becomes home. Years from now, someone will ask about the night a janitor made a ballroom cry. And someone else will say, he wasn't just a janitor. He was a man who finished a song that was waiting. And someone else will whisper, he reminded us how to feel. Sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest stories. And sometimes, a single melody is all it takes to remind us we're not alone. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you. Tell us where in the world you're watching from. It's beautiful to see how far a song can travel. And if you'd like more stories that heal, inspire, and stay with you long after the screen fades, feel free to subscribe. We'll be right here with another light when you need it. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you for spending your time with us today. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and keep listening with your heart.